I didn't want to get too far into the fall without taking some time to talk about my favorite Canadian whiskey release of the last year, Crown Royal Noble Collection Barley Edition. This is my favorite Canadian whiskey release from the past year. It is started to become more readily available on shelves in the US. I haven't seen it in Canada. I hope it comes up here. I don't know if it will. These releases don't always make it up to the country they're made, which is a wonderful thing that some of us Canadians experience about Canadian whiskey. First thing I want to say about it, this is a limited release from Crown Royal. Crown Royal is a very interesting distillery. It's very diverse. So many people associate, we'll think about Crown Royal and they'll think about Crown Royal Fountain Deluxe, which is the flagship Crown Royal. The one thing I would just quickly note is this whiskey tastes nothing like that whiskey. Crown Royal produces 5 different types of distillate on a regular basis, as well as experimental ones like this. It's very diverse. A lot of, most distilleries in Scotland and bourbon distilleries might make 1 or 2 distillates, but that's it. It's not common that you have a distillery making 5 very distinct and different types of distillates. Pretty unique. And I mean, if you taste Crown Royal Northern Harvest Rye alongside Crown Royal Fine Deluxe, you get a taste for this diversity. If you add in Crown Royal Single Barrel, you realize those 3 whiskeys taste nothing alike. And the market's a bit different. Crown Royal Fine Deluxe, it's light, it's a little sweet, it's kind of soft and subtle. This is not that. So this is a Crown Royal, but it is different than what some of you may associate with Crown Royal. So this is the last, sadly, in a line of limited releases from Crown Royal, the Noble Collection. There have been, I believe, 6 of them. And the last number of years, they've represented some of the best Canadian whiskey I think we've had the opportunity to have as consumers in the last 20 years. So they've done a really good job. The last 4 releases have all been extremely different, very complex, very interesting, much more on the line of really neat experimentation and riffs on a family style, as opposed to just finishing their whiskey in a barrel. So it's kind of the dream in terms of a special release, and for those interested in Canadian whiskey, where we don't often see the variety of whiskeys as a consumer that the country produces, it's been a real treat. So very sad to see these go. Crown Royal has told me they'll continue to do limited releases. We'll see what shape and form those come in and price. But I hope we get some more of these really good whiskeys that are coming in at somewhat reasonable prices. So this whiskey is an all barley whiskey. So it's a mix of unmalted and malted barley. It's mostly unmalted. There's some malted barley as well. It's distilled in a column still, so not in a pot still like Irish whiskey is. I would note just very quickly, this doesn't taste at all like an Irish whiskey. It doesn't taste like Scottish barley whiskeys either, but it definitely tastes like barley. And it's one of the things I find most interesting about this whiskey. It's fairly young. I would just pass a quick note on, I've looked around what information's given online. Sometimes it's hard to know what to trust. The one thing I would say is there's some sources online that indicate that this is a whiskey that's a bit older. It's not. It's a fairly young whiskey. So you may see some information with a bit of a higher age number on there. From everything I'm aware of through my contacts at Crown Royal, that's not the case. Not a young whiskey, not an old whiskey. So it doesn't really matter. What matters is the taste. We'll get into that, but I did just want to note that. As a quick aside as well, I've talked with a lot of people in the industry, and you get a lot of word of mouth. A lot of that stuff's incorrect. I'm not talking about Crown Royal specifically, I'm speaking very generally. I've spoken with lots of people associated with brands who've given false or contradictory information. Also, lots of times correct information, but you need to do your due diligence on the information. Other than that, that's most of what we know about this whiskey. Crown Royal's been interested, or certain people at Crown Royal have been interested in doing something with barley for a while, and so pretty unique. Barley isn't something they usually have as one of their core streams of production, so it's a unique opportunity to taste something a bit different. So let's get into tasting. The other thing I'll just note as I'm pouring about this whiskey, it comes in at 45%. So that's where it comes. Prices vary. I think around 70 US is where I've seen these at, but obviously that'll vary. It's very interesting on the nose. As you can see, I've tasted this a few times. It's very barley forward, so you get that kind of really bright, unique graininess that you get with barley. It's not quite fruity, but it almost leans a bit that direction. But you also get really interesting fruity notes in this. You get a good bit of oak. It's not an overly oaky whiskey, but oak is one of the core fundamental braces that supports this whiskey. You get a really nice spiciness, and then you get a nice creaminess, and it kind of combines a bit with fruit, like banana cream pie is something you might find in this. Lots of vanilla. To nose, it's very complex. It develops over time as well, and I found, as I've had more of it, the graininess comes out more as it sits, and you get this really nice sweet kind of compost smell coming from it, kind of like composting grass, in a very positive way. Just really nice fall whiskey, to be honest. But the spice is just fascinating. It has this really nice edge of spice that's sharp and distinct. So very, very interesting on the nose. The palate comes in with a medium body. It has a really, really nice tannic thread that comes through it that provides quite a bit of structure. It really helps one to notice kind of the spiciness of this. The fruit sits on top. It's still quite a creamy whiskey. And the finish has a really, really nice interplay of fruit and spice. And it lasts reasonably long as well. So really, really nice whiskey. It's very interesting. There's lots of good tasting notes online. But I'll maybe, instead of focusing on specific notes, put it a bit into context. It has a lot of the characteristics of Crown Royal in terms of the way that they use fruit and spice together. Not in Crown Royal Fine Deluxe or some of their softer blends, even like Crown Royal Black or some of those lighter Crown Royal whiskeys, but more, this doesn't have the intense spice that Northern Harvest does, but it has a similar sharp edge of spice and this very vibrant, almost herbaceous spice that is somewhat reminiscent of some of the rye whiskeys from Crown Royal. But not to say it tastes like a rye whiskey. This is very much a barley whiskey, but it's very different. It doesn't have the kind of green grassiness and the kind of grassy spice that Irish whiskeys do. It doesn't have the kind of roundness and almost focus of some of the Scottish whiskeys, where they're almost zooming in on complexity around 1 or 2 points. This has 4 or 5 different kind of taste themes going on that work really well together and are really interesting. And it has, in a way, it's a nod to the way you might blend whiskeys, where you're combining different flavors. But this isn't blended in the sense of many Canadian whiskeys, which are blends of very different styles of whiskey. This is one distillate. So very, very interesting. It's, you know, the closest. It's most closely associated with, I would say, some of the other Noble releases character. Not to say it tastes the same, but it's kind of almost in the style of the winter wheat, if you've had that, as opposed to the style of some of their ryes, or the style of some of their kind of standard blends. So it's fantastic whiskey. The reason I really love it, it tastes really good, but as I said, it's been an expression of barley that's different than all the other expressions of barley that I've had, and I've had quite a few from all around the world. So it's really unique. It's showed me something new about what you can do with barley as a core flavor component that's different. And so pleases the tongue. Enjoyable drink, but also, you know, if you're interested in taste and like to see new things, it really engages the mind. The intrigue of the whiskey, as I say, is quite good here. So highly recommended. Give it a shot if you can. I think it's a fantastic whiskey, and I hope some of you are able to enjoy it.